In the late 1930s, Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini joined forces. In the summer of 1937, an 8-year-old German boy had a date with history. Today we speak with the boy who met Hitler. Maury, I can't think there's too many people on the face of the earth left today, or even in any day, that can say they actually looked into the eyes of Adolf Hitler. Let's talk a little bit prior to meeting Hitler.
Yes.
You were part of the Nazi youth movement. And for a Jewish kid, how did something like that happen?
I was a very good soccer player, which they respected. I looked like them. I looked more like them than they did. If you saw a picture of me, I had reddish blonde hair, I had a snub nose, freckle face, and one hell of an attitude. Always ready for a fight. That to them was wonderful.
Lead me up to what happened.
First of all, I'm of Jewish heritage.
You kept the Jewish part hidden, right?
No, that's the irony of it. No, they all know they looked the other way, because the first day when I came to grade school, when I was 6 years old in 1935, the principal and the vice principal, both members of the Nazi Party, handed me papers saying that I was an Aryan.
So do you join the Nazi youth, or is it something that they just recruited you into?
They recruited me into it.
Did you even understand the depth of what that
No,
meant, or what was going on?
Of course not. I was happy with it. It freed me, because at that point, anybody of Jewish background and Jewish heritage was restricted from going to movies, from going to parks, from going to swimming pools. I was even able, after that, to go to the Olympics in 1936. I was one of the few kids that were able to go there and were taken there to watch Jesse Owens and watch the Germans win most of the first places in the Olympics.
So take us back to that day, the day that you actually came in contact with the Fuhrer.
All right, what happened was that after Hitler and Mussolini signed that Pact of Steel, they decided to come to Berlin. And the train was going to go from Venice to Berlin, where the final ceremony would take place. And I was one of 6 kids out of a school of about 400 that was picked to go to stand outside the station and salute the train as it came by. Nobody expected the train to stop.
That wasn't part of the plan.
That wasn't part of the plan. Well, suddenly it stopped. And later on we found out that Hitler always liked to see a bunch of young people, to be photographed seeing young people, which I didn't know. So here I am with 5 other kids saluting the train, and suddenly the train stops. Out first came the Balila. The Balila were the Italian youth movement. And I remember we had little black shorts and a white shirt, and they had a very fancy hat with a tassel and so on. We were kind of jealous. I said, they were all spoofed up. We were just playing little kids. But then, to everybody's shock, out came Mussolini. Mussolini just stayed on the steps, but Hitler came walking over to these 6 kids, and guess who he came up to? Me. And I'll never forget this as long as I live. I could see those eyes of his. They were hypnotic. They were hypnotic eyes. I mean, I say, well, maybe I got carried away. No, there was something very hypnotic about him. And I didn't know whether it was evil. It was evil. And he looked at me, and he patted me on the head, and he shook my hand, and then turned around and walked back to the train.
No conversation?
No conversation, none whatsoever.
And your family, your father, your mother, your grandmother, all had very prominent roles in the German government or German...
Well, my father was the head of the social democratic doctors movement before Hitler. I mean, the Social Democrats were the ruling party of Germany. They always have been very strong, and he was known as that. My grandmother, who had been a widow for quite a while, had become a companion to the chief of staff of the German army.
The chief of staff?
Chief of staff.
Didn't your grandmother kind of think that she was protected when she really wasn't?
That's true. Because Hans von Fritsch was found out to be anti-Nazi. And they gave him a choice of either being hanged, shot, or when the German army attacked Poland, to be out in the front line so he could be shot by the Polish soldiers, which is what happened.
And was your family still in Germany at that point, or had you?
No. My father escaped with the help of an uncle whose wife was the first cousin of Herbert Lehman, the governor of New York, who sent $35,000 to Fulgencio Batista. He was the president of Cuba, actually the dictator.
And $35,000 in those days
lot
is
of money.
a huge sum of money.
Yeah, so this gave my father the opportunity to escape, because Crystal Night, which was November the 9th, 1938, they were going to send him to Dachau, the concentration camp, because all prominent Jews were being sent to concentration camps to get their money to help balance the German budget. And since he had such a high position with the Social Democrats, they had an underground railway, and they got him to Hamburg. And there was a banana boat, a Cuban banana boat, floating in the Baltic. And that banana boat came to Hamburg to pick up my father. So he was the only passenger among hundreds and hundreds of bananas.
And so your family is still left behind in Germany at that
Well,
point?
when you say my family, it's my grandmother was left behind, my mother, and my brother. But then...
And you?
Yeah, and me. But then we came over on the SS Manhattan. I remember going with my mother to the American Embassy, which was the last step to get the signed and affidavits. And as I was standing there, the secretary, the German secretary of the American ambassador, a little Nazi woman, started hectoring my mother, and my mother cried. The first time in my life I ever saw my mother cry. I got so angry, I had a bad temper. You wouldn't know that knowing me as a nice guy as you know today. But I had a horrible temper. And I called her all kind of names, and I was ready to jump over the table and hit her. And that woman was so absolutely shocked by this kid acting the way that she says, go ahead and leave.
So you couldn't just get into the country, the United States. You had to have sponsors. You had to have...
Three sponsors.
Who sponsored you?
Three uncles. One was executive vice president of Gulf Oil in Pittsburgh. Another one had York Furniture chain. This was during the Depression, and it was quite wealthy. And the third one, an uncle of my mother, was in the food business. So they were all very well-to-do. And also the Jewish Federation of Pittsburgh was very helpful.
And your dad is already in the United States at this point?
No, my father was only able to go to Cuba. That was another chapter. I wrote a letter with the help of one of my uncles to the president. Now, this is another strange story. It's very skeptical. He said, I'm going to write a letter to the president. He probably won't even see it.
Bautista?
No, to Roosevelt, to get my father into the United States. So I wrote the letter with his help. 10 days later, my father makes a transatlantic call, which at that day, from Cuba to the United States, was transatlantic. He had been told by the Consul General in Havana to get his affairs in order within 36 hours and get on a plane to Miami. So he was able to get in because Jewish refugees that were able to get to Cuba took him at least 5 or 6 years. He had only been there a little over a year.
So you think that letter may have had something to do with it?
Your guess is as good as mine.
But that's what happened.
It came out of nowhere.
Unbelievable.
Here's a little kid, lucky. I think that God was looking out for me. That's the only way I can look at it. I was a lucky little kid.
Divine intervention.
I believe it. I read. It's the only thing I can believe.
And so what happened to Grandma?
My grandmother was finally rounded up. She wound up at Theresienstadt, which was a transfer camper, and eventually was gassed in Treblinka.
Wow.
Yeah. tell the story only because I want to put the human factor in, and that I was the luckiest person in the world to have been protected by the good Lord to be able to get through what I did.
And that's The Boy Who Met Hitler. Amazing.